Trump gave a warning. Sundar Pichai's humble answer stunned the crowd. The hall was silent, but the silence was heavy, not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, when everyone knows something big is about to happen. Hundreds of people were gathered in that grand auditorium, leaders from politics, business, and technology. Cameras lined the edges of the room, and every seat was filled with eyes that carried curiosity and expectation. The world was watching. Donald Trump sat in the front row, his posture strong, his expression serious. He had been invited as a guest of honor, and he was ready to speak his mind. Behind him, advisors whispered, but Trump raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He wanted the stage clear for what he was about to say. Then came Sundar Pichai, walking calmly toward the podium, the CIO of one of the most powerful technology companies in the world. Yet his steps carried no arrogance, no weight of superiority. Instead, there was gentleness in his walk, humility in his eyes. People stood to applaud, but Sundar simply pressed his palms together, bowing slightly as if reminding everyone that respect mattered more than power. But before Sundar could speak, Trump leaned forward. His voice cut through the room like a sharp blade. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "technology is powerful, but power unchecked can destroy. I have seen how nations rise and fall because they forget their people, because they forget humility. India grows fast, America struggles, China competes, but let me give you all a warning. Do not let technology replace humanity. Do not let the race for progress erase respect." The words shocked the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, others whispered in disbelief. It was not the kind of warning they expected from Trump. He was often seen as bold, sometimes harsh, but now his voice carried an unusual weight, a strange sincerity. The cameras zoomed in on Sundar's face. He stood still, hands resting on the podium, waiting. The crowd's eyes moved between the two men, wondering how Sundar would respond. There was tension in the air, the kind that makes hearts beat faster, the kind that keeps people from even blinking. Finally, Sundar spoke. His voice was soft, almost gentle, yet every word reached the back of the hall. "Mr. Trump," he said, "you are right that technology is powerful. It changes lives, but it also tests values. I was born in a small town in India. My father worked hard. My mother sacrificed, and they taught me one lesson. Respect is not given by titles, it is earned by kindness. I stand here not as the head of a company, but as the son of parents who believed in humility. I agree with your warning. Humanity must stay above technology." His words spread through the hall like a quiet wave. People leaned forward, listening. The crowd expected him to defend technology, to show pride in his company. But Sundar's answer was different. It was humble. It was disarming. For a moment, Trump looked surprised. His eyes narrowed, then softened. He had expected resistance, maybe even challenge, but what he found instead was agreement laced with humility. Sundar did not fight his warning. He embraced it. And in that embrace, the hall felt something unexpected: unity. Yet beneath the applause that followed, there was still unease. Because behind the cameras, behind the speeches, there were whispers of rivalry. Leaders from different nations had gathered, each with their own pride, their own agenda. Trump's warning had stirred old tensions, and Sundar's humble reply had calmed them, but not erased them. And so the story began. One of warnings, answers, and lessons that would test not only leaders but every person who believed in respect, humility, resilience, and kindness. The silence after the applause did not fade quickly. It rolled across the hall like waves, each clap carrying both relief and surprise. People had expected conflict, but what they saw was humility meeting power. Sundar's reply had changed the air in the room, softening the edges of tension. Yet behind the smiles, the silence that followed was heavier than before. Trump leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. His warning had been clear, and Sundar's answer had been gentle, but the crowd could feel something unspoken between them. Two men from two different worlds, one from politics and one from technology, had met in a space that was bigger than both: human respect. But would it last? A journalist sitting in the second row scribbled quickly in his notebook. He whispered to his colleague, "This is history, but it could also be the start of something bigger." His words carried the doubt many in the hall shared. Was this moment unity, or was it only calm before another storm? Sundar adjusted the microphone. He could have ended there, but he chose to go deeper. "We live in times," he said, "where strength is measured by how loud we can shout, how fast we can move, how much we can take. But true strength is measured in how much we can listen, how patient we can be, and how kind we remain when it is hardest to be kind." The hall grew still. People who moments earlier were clapping now sat frozen. Sundar's words did not sound like a business leader's speech. They sounded like a personal truth. Trump's eyes studied him, sharp and searching. He was not a man easily impressed, but something in Sundar's calmness made him pause. He shifted slightly as if testing the ground between pride and respect, and then, from the corner of the hall, a voice rose. It was not part of the plan, not part of the script. A young woman, an immigrant student from India who had been invited as part of the audience, stood up. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Mr. Pichai, Mr. Trump," she said, "I left my home to study here. Sometimes I feel invisible. Sometimes I feel unwanted. When you speak of technology, when you speak of power, do you remember us, the ones who live in the middle of both worlds?" Her words pierced the silence. The cameras turned. The crowd gasped. Security moved slightly, but Sundar raised his hand, stopping them. He looked at the young woman and nodded gently. "Yes," he said softly, "I remember you. Because I was you." The hall trembled with emotion. Trump turned, his expression unreadable. The student sat down, tears in her eyes, but her question had changed the energy in the room. It was no longer only about leaders. It was about people, their fears, their struggles, their search for belonging. Trump cleared his throat. "Young lady," he said, his voice strong but less sharp now, "this country was built by people like you. Sometimes we forget that. Maybe my warning was not only for technology. Maybe it was also for us, to remember the people who carry the weight of progress." The crowd listened in silence because this was not the Trump they had expected to hear. His words carried a strange honesty, a rare softness that surprised even his supporters. Sundar stepped back from the microphone for a moment, letting the weight of the exchange settle. Then he spoke again. "This is why warnings matter. Not to divide, but to remind us that humanity must always be first. Technology, politics, business, none of it matters if we forget kindness." Applause rose again, but this time it was slower, more thoughtful. People clapped not because of the spectacle, but because of the truth. Yet behind the applause, some faces remained cold. Not everyone wanted unity. Not everyone wanted humility to win. Among the rows of leaders, a few whispered to each other, their eyes sharp, their expressions hard. They saw in Sundar's words not inspiration, but threat. And in Trump's softening, they saw weakness. The hall did not know it yet, but this night would not end with applause. It would only begin here, with a warning, a humble answer, and a question that would ignite a fire across nations. Whispers in the shadows. The hall emptied slowly after the speeches ended, but the air was still heavy. People walked out in silence, not knowing what to say. Some spoke quietly, their voices filled with wonder. Others frowned, carrying questions in their eyes. Trump's warning and Sundar's humble reply had left a mark, but not all marks are the same. Some heal, and some cut deeper. Outside the hall, under the glow of bright streetlights, reporters rushed to send their headlines. Trump's warning shakes the hall. Sundar Pichai's humble answer stuns the crowd. Cameras flashed. Microphones chased, and the world began to react. But in the quiet corners of the building, away from the cameras, a different conversation was taking place. 3 men in dark suits sat together, their faces shadowed. They were not journalists, not students, not dreamers. They were power brokers, men who thrived on division. "Did you see how they clapped for him?" One of them whispered angrily. Pichai speaks of humility, and suddenly he is the hero. This is dangerous. And Trump, the second replied, his tone sharp. He softened. He agreed. If people believe in this unity, our influence weakens. Respect and kindness do not serve us. Conflict does. The third man, older and calmer, leaned forward. Let them speak of respect. We will plant doubt. We will remind the world that humility is weakness. If Sundar Pichai rises higher after tonight, we will bring him down. Their whispers were lost in the night, but their intentions were not. Sometimes history is not shaped by the applause in public halls, but by the whispers in the shadows. Inside the hotel where Sundar stayed, the night was quiet. He sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. He thought of his parents in India, the sacrifices they made, the lessons they gave him. Humility, patience, respect. These values had carried him across oceans. But tonight he felt a strange weight. He knew his words had touched many hearts, but he also knew they had stirred enemies. But not everyone saw it the same way. In the days that followed, news channels played clips of the event again and again. Some praised Sundar, some mocked him. Some praised Trump, some doubted him. Opinions divided, debates grew, and soon the simple exchange of respect became a storm of arguments. The young student who had stood up that night watched the chaos unfold on her small television in her rented apartment. She whispered to herself, "Why do people twist kindness into weakness? Why is humility so hard for them to understand?" Tears filled her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. Deep down, she felt hope, because she had seen something real that night. Leaders choosing humility over pride. Yet, far away in closed rooms, those who feared change began their plans. They whispered louder, spread doubt faster, and prepared to test whether humility could truly survive in a world addicted to power. The storm beyond the holidays turned into weeks, but the echoes of that night refused to fade. The world was still talking about it. Newspapers printed headlines with Sundar's humble words. Television hosts replayed Trump's unusual warning again and again. In universities, students debated. In offices, workers whispered. Even in small homes, families watched clips and asked each other, was this the beginning of change, or just another moment lost in noise? But behind the attention, there was division. In some corners of the world, people found hope. They said, if leaders can respect each other, maybe we can too. In other corners, doubt grew stronger. Whispers turned into rumors, rumors into anger. Humility is weakness, some voices declared. Respect is a mask for control, others argued. In Silicon Valley, Sundar Pichai sat in a closed meeting with his closest team. They looked tired, carrying laptops filled with data and faces filled with worry. One of them spoke softly. Sundar, after your speech, millions supported you, but millions also attacked you. Social media is flooded. Some praise your humility. Others accuse you of hiding power behind it. The pressure is rising. Sundar listened quietly. He did not rush to answer. Finally, he said, when kindness creates division, the problem is not kindness. The problem is fear. We must not stop because they misunderstand. We must continue to show respect. The team nodded, but their eyes showed doubt. They admired his calm, but they knew the world was not always kind to those who stayed gentle. Meanwhile, in Washington, Trump was holding his own battles. Advisors pushed him hard. Sir, one argued, you cannot keep praising humility. Your supporters want strength. They want you to fight, not to agree. Trump stared out the window, his voice lower than usual. Strength is not always in fighting. Sometimes strength is in admitting respect. That man reminded me of something. I will not back down from it. His advisors exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen him so still, so thoughtful. But outside that room, the media twisted every word, turning sincerity into conflict and conflict into ratings, far from the power halls. The young student who had spoken that night was back in her classroom. Her friends treated her differently now. Some admired her courage, others avoided her, afraid of attention. She often walked home alone. carrying the weight of being seen and judged. Yet, when she remembered Sundar's calm answer to her question, her heart found strength. But shadows were moving faster. The three men who had whispered in the dark after the event were no longer alone. They had allies, people who thrived on division. They spread their messages across borders. Leaders are weak. Technology is dangerous. Humility is a trap. Their words infected conversations like poison. And then, one evening, as Sundar was preparing for a private dinner with community leaders, a news alert flashed across the screen in his office. The headline read, "Secret Documents Leak. Questions rise about global tech leaders' motives." The leak spread like fire. No one knew who was behind it, but it was clear the goal was to create mistrust. Reports accused technology giants of hiding secrets, of manipulating people, of pretending to be humble while seeking power. Trump saw the same headlines in his suite. His phone rang endlessly with advisors telling him to distance himself, to call Sundar out, to break the image of unity. The young student saw the same headlines on her cracked phone screen. Her heart sank. "They are trying to destroy what was real," she whispered. The storm was no longer just about words spoken in a hall. It had spread into homes, into hearts, into the very trust people held. Sundar's humility had touched millions, but now it was being tested by forces that feared it. And as the night grew darker, the whispers in the shadows smiled. Their plan was working. The breaking point, the storm grew louder with every passing day. Newspapers printed half-truths, television anchors shouted in circles, and social media burned with anger. Everywhere, the same question echoed. Can humility survive in a world hungry for power? Sundar Pichai felt the weight more than anyone. He sat in his office late into the night, the city lights glowing outside the glass walls. Stacks of reports lay on the table, but he barely touched them. His thoughts were far away, on his childhood in India, on the lessons his father whispered at the dinner table, on his mother's quiet sacrifices. Those memories had built the man he was. But tonight, those memories felt like fragile candles in a storm trying to blow them out. His closest advisor entered quietly. "Sundar, you must speak again," she said. "The world is drowning in lies. If you remain silent, they will believe the worst." Sundar looked at her, his eyes calm but tired. "If I speak, they will twist it. If I stay silent, they will invent it. But either way, the truth does not change. Respect is not weakness. Humility is not a mask. The question is, will the world still believe it?" Meanwhile, Trump was facing his own storm. His advisors pressured him harder. "Sir," one said firmly, "you cannot stay close to Pichai. This leak is poison. Distance yourself now, or your image will collapse." Trump slammed his hand on the table, his voice shaking the room. "Collapse? Image? Do you think this is about image?" That man spoke the truth. "I will not betray it for comfort." The advisors fell silent. For the first time, they saw a side of him that was not about politics, not about winning, but about conviction. Far from the halls of power, the young student walked home in the cold evening air. People recognized her now. Some praised her, some mocked her. Her heart was heavy, but her steps did not stop. She carried Sundar's words with her like a shield. "I was you," he had said. Those words gave her strength when the world tried to make her small. But the shadows that worked against them were not silent. The three men who once whispered now stood before larger groups, their voices louder. "Look at them," they told the crowds. "Pichai speaks of humility, but it is a mask. Trump speaks of respect, but it is weakness. They want to control you by softening you. Fight back before it is too late." The crowds listened. Fear grew, anger spread, and soon protests filled the streets, not only in one country but across many. Signs rose, voices shouted, and divisions widened. Sundar watched the images on the news screen, and for the first time, a crack of pain showed in his calm face. "They twist kindness into chains," he whispered. "They teach people to fear humility." His advisor placed a hand on his shoulder. "What will you do?" Sundar stood slowly, his eyes steady again. "I will not hide. If kindness is on trial, then I will stand in the open and defend it. Not with pride, not with anger, but with truth. Plans were made for a global summit, a gathering where leaders would speak directly to the world. Sundar was invited. Trump was invited. The student who had once spoken in the hall was invited too, her small voice now carrying the weight of millions who felt unseen. But as the date approached, warnings grew louder. Anonymous messages arrived. Stay silent or face the cost. Threats whispered through emails, through phone calls, through dark corners. Still, Sundar prepared. His resilience was being tested, but he knew that the true test of humility is not when the world agrees. It is when the world doubts. The night before the summit, Sundar sat alone again by the window. The city outside glowed with restless energy. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Let them test me. I will not bend. I will not forget who I am." In another hotel across the city, Trump was pacing again, restless as ever. He stopped, looked at his reflection, and muttered, "The world will not expect what they are about to see." And somewhere far away the shadows prepared their final strike. For they knew that if humility won tomorrow, their power would crumble forever. The summit of truth. The morning of the summit arrived with a restless sky. Gray clouds hung heavy over the city, as if even nature held its breath. The streets outside the venue were filled with protesters holding signs, some demanding justice, others demanding division. The air was thick with noise, but inside the great hall, silence waited once again. World leaders took their seats one by one. Flashes from cameras painted the room in bursts of light. Every corner was guarded, every movement recorded. The weight of the event was felt by all. Tonight was not just a meeting. It was Judgment Day for humility itself. Sundar Pichai entered quietly, as he always did. His calm presence contrasted with the chaos outside. He greeted no one with grand gestures, only small nods and folded hands. Yet his very calmness drew the eyes of the crowd. People whispered, "He does not look afraid." Trump entered moments later. His steps were bold, his presence sharp. He did not smile, but his eyes carried something unusual. Focus, not fury. The two men exchanged a brief look, and for a moment the hall felt an invisible bridge between them. The young student was seated among a small group at the front. Her hands trembled, but her eyes glowed with determination. She never thought her small voice would carry her here, but destiny had given her a seat in history. The summit began. Leaders from different nations gave long speeches, filled with promises and warnings. Some spoke of strength, others of fear. But none captured the room. People waited, restless, for the two men who had started this storm. Finally, it was Sundar's turn. He walked to the podium, his steps unhurried. The hall grew still. "My friends," he began softly, "we gather in a time of noise. Voices grow louder every day, but louder is not always stronger. Anger spreads faster than kindness. Fear spreads faster than trust. Yet, if we lose kindness and trust, what kind of world will we lead?" He paused, scanning the room. His eyes met those of the student, and she felt his words were speaking directly to her. "When I was a boy," he continued, "my family did not have much, but my father told me one thing. You may not have wealth, but you can always have respect. That lesson carried me here, and tonight I say this. Respect is not weakness. Humility is not surrender. They are the roots of strength. If we cut those roots, our progress will collapse." The hall trembled with silence. Many leaned forward, listening. Some wiped tears quietly. His words were not dramatic, not loud, but they carried the weight of truth. Then Trump stood. His voice was deep, strong, and unexpected. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I came here ready to warn the world. I warned against technology without humanity, and I stand by it. But tonight I will add something more. Strength is not in building walls, it is in building respect. I have fought many battles, but the battle that matters most is the one against pride. Humility is not my enemy, "It is my ally." Gasps echoed through the hall. Many expected Trump to clash with Sundar, but instead he stood beside him, not with words of rivalry, but of agreement. The student rose suddenly. Her voice trembled but carried strength. If leaders can choose respect, why can't the world? Why can't we, the people, follow the same path? Applause broke out, slow at first, then rising. People stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even crying. The hall felt alive with hope, a wave of unity sweeping across borders, across differences, but not all clapped. In the shadows of the hall, the men who feared this unity clenched their fists. Their plans were unraveling. Their whispers of division were drowning in a sea of applause. Still, they were not ready to give up. One of them pulled out a phone, sending a final message. Plan 2 begins now. The summit hall was filled with applause, but outside the storm had not ended. And as night approached, the greatest test of humility was yet to come. The final strike. The applause inside the summit hall was thunderous, but outside the building the air was tense. Protesters clashed, arguments flared, and confusion spread faster than the cheers. Unseen by the crowd, the shadows moved quietly, carrying their final plan into action. Inside, Sundar Pichai stood with calm eyes, but his heart was heavy. He knew that humility was not safe in a world where fear grew like fire. Trump, too, though bold and strong in speech, felt the weight of what was coming. The young student looked around, realizing this was no longer just about speeches. This was a battle of belief. As the applause softened, a sudden alarm cut through the hall. The giant screens flickered and then images appeared. Fabricated documents, twisted headlines, false recordings. The shadows had struck. The screen screamed with accusations. Pichai planned manipulation. Trump betrayed his people. The summit is a lie. Gasps filled the hall. Leaders looked at each other, confused and angry. Some shouted, "Is this true?" Others stood, pointing fingers. The unity built moments earlier began to crack under the weight of lies. The shadows smiled in hidden corners. Their trap had worked before. Truth was fragile and fear was strong, but Sundar did not move from the podium. He raised his hand gently, asking for silence. The room hesitated, torn between panic and patience. When the noise dimmed, he spoke. "This," he said softly, "is why humility is tested. Lies will come. Anger will rise. But we must ask ourselves, who are we when fear knocks? Are we quick to believe the worst, or do we stop to remember the truth we felt in our hearts just moments ago?" His voice did not shake, though the screens behind him burned with lies. He turned toward Trump and nodded slightly as if passing the moment to him. Trump stepped forward, his voice thunderous. "I have been accused many times. I have been attacked, judged, and hated. But tonight I will say this: respect cannot be destroyed by lies. Humility cannot be erased by fear. If you let these false screens control you, you are surrendering to shadows. I will not surrender." The hall shook with noise again, but this time the noise was different. Leaders who moments earlier had doubted now found courage. The student rose again, her voice breaking but strong. "Truth is not in the screens. Truth is in the respect we saw tonight. I will not let fear decide for me." Others followed. Applause began again, louder, stronger. The lies on the screens began to look weaker in the face of human conviction. People clapped not for one man, not for one leader, but for the values that held them together. Outside, protesters who had seen the summit speeches live began to shout in unity. Many dropped their signs of division and raised their voices for respect. Slowly, the noise of anger was replaced by chants of hope. The shadows, watching their plan collapse, faded into silence. Fear had failed where humility had stood strong. As the summit closed, Sundar spoke one final time. "Remember tonight not for the lies, but for how we refused to bow to them. Humility is not weakness. Kindness is not weakness. They are the only strengths that survive storms." Trump placed his hand briefly on Sundar's shoulder, a gesture unexpected but powerful. Two men, so different yet bound by one truth: respect. The young student stood silently in the front row, tears on her cheeks. She had come searching for belonging. Tonight, she carried something greater, faith that humanity could still choose kindness. When the leaders left the hall, the world outside was not healed, but it was changed. The storm had not ended, but a light now burned stronger than before. Because in a world that tried to twist humility into weakness, that night proved it was the greatest strength of all.